The COVID-19 pandemic has been very hard on the world. Healthcare workers have been overwhelmed for the longest of times, and everyone staying in their homes has taken its toll on the world economy. But more so than that, people have been socially isolated from each other due to quarantine. And all this leads to an emotion that we're all familiar with by now: loneliness. Loneliness is a pain we get from inadequate social contact with the people around us. Now, it's important to note that loneliness is purely subjective. If you feel lonely, you are lonely, even if you're surrounded by people. Here we have to think about quality versus quantity. They're both equally important when it comes to social connections. You could be surrounded by people and still be lonely. You could have just a few friends, but if you're truly connected with them, you won't feel lonely. The next thing to note is the whole introvert-extrovert split. Now, being lonely has nothing to do with being introverted or extroverted, and both types of people are just as susceptible. Introverts like to be alone to recharge themselves, and being alone is not the same thing as being lonely. Extroverts can feel lonely even when they're around a lot of people. Now again, loneliness is about your specific needs and not some standard of how many people you may or may not meet. And it's no wonder loneliness is such a painful emotion to us. It goes against our most basic needs as social creatures. Social cooperation has always been our biggest strength. Prehistoric humans survived and flourished because they stuck together. Those who didn't stick with the group, who weren't accepted in the group, would die out, having to fend off nature all alone. In that way, those who are more social and cooperative were deemed more favorable by nature, and the trait would be selected for. The need for social connection is one of many things that are wired into us, even as babies. There's really no deeper emotional instinct than connection. If you deprive a baby rat of any social contact, it will die in a few weeks, even if it was surrounded by all the food, water, and shelter that it needs. And we humans are really no better. Loneliness isn't just a mental health crisis nowadays. It should be a public health crisis as well. Chronic loneliness reduces your lifespan by up to 14 years. Chronic loneliness is just as bad as smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. It leads to high blood pressure and all kinds of negative health effects. Loneliness is physical just as much as it is psychological. Now, if you're feeling lonely, it's a sign that you should be looking for better social interactions. It's a call to action, but it's a very bad one for many reasons. One is that loneliness actually paralyzes you. The more lonely you feel, the harder it is to look for social interaction. Because when you're lonely, your mind tries to justify your loneliness. Your mind believes that some part of you, or even all of you, is somehow worthless. Loneliness is heavily related to shame, which we talked about 2 episodes ago. The loneliness justifies the shame and vice versa. It's in this way that you have a negative feedback loop, where these 2 negative feelings, loneliness and shame, they feed off of each other. Now, another feature of loneliness that you may not know is that it makes you more receptive of people's behaviors. Things like facial expressions and body language. Now, this makes sense from a problem-solving perspective. You're not getting adequate social interactions, so you analyze social cues to figure out what the problem is. Now, the problem with loneliness, is that it also affects your accuracy in judging social cues. You're getting more sensory information than you did, but your judgment of the information is also even worse. You're far more attuned to looking at the negative social cues compared to positive or even neutral ones. Research has shown that we're much more likely to misinterpret social situations and facial expressions of others when we're feeling lonely. Loneliness is a call to action, and it's a correcting tool for our behaviors, but it's more counterproductive than it is helpful to us. Loneliness is probably one of the most painful things to come out of this pandemic, and it's really no wonder that many people push for quarantine restrictions to be lifted. Now, I'm not saying that it's justified or that it's right, but that it's understandable. And that's why diseases that prey on our social needs, like COVID-19, with its high infection rate, that's why these diseases thrive. It's a very effective strategy on the part of the virus. I have to give credit where credit is due, even though it's quite a terrible thing. We've been talking about a lot of depressing things, but let's try to make something out of it. Let's talk about solutions to loneliness. The most important thing is awareness. Awareness precedes control. When we're lonely, it's hard for us to see that we're being influenced by our loneliness. You have to critically look at your behaviors and how you interpret the behaviors of others. Start with the assumption that you're inherently biased and that your thoughts and ideas about yourself are not fact. I repeat, your thoughts and ideas are not fact. They're just thoughts that come and go like the wind. If you ever get the thought that you're worthless, just listen to it and let it go. Now, once you've gained awareness of your emotions and thoughts, take the time to examine them critically. One of the things we're not taught to do is to criticize our own thoughts. Now, this can be challenging because it's hard to separate your thoughts from you. Make that distinction. When you criticize your thoughts or your behaviors, and if there's really something wrong there, let the thoughts and behaviors die and not you. Learn to distance yourself from your thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. They're still part of you, but they're not you. You are so much more than that. You have to make this distinction before you can let go. Now, once you do this, once you really examine your thoughts, and you've learned to remove yourself from your negative self-talk, you can finally start reaching out to other people. Reach out to someone you know without expecting anything. If you find yourself thinking bad thoughts like you're not worth their time or you're not worth it or anything along those lines, that's okay too. Sit with those feelings for a while and do it anyways. Call or text that one friend you haven't talked to in a while. You have to actively fight against your thoughts and emotions. Like I said in the last episode, do it on your own terms. That way, you'll learn to be brave. The pandemic has done wonders in making people feel lonely, and we need to be aware of the effects of loneliness before we can tackle it for ourselves. If we can understand that loneliness itself makes us more lonely, we can move past ourselves and past loneliness. Don't let loneliness dictate your life. Let it serve as a reminder of the most precious thing we have in life, the need to connect with others.